Welcome to this BimlFlex webinar. It's the first public webinar of BimlFlex, and I thought we'll cover off something that probably is on the mind of a lot of people, is data warehousing in the cloud and Azure Data Warehousing, and show you how we at Verigens have gone about solving the problem of getting the data into the cloud. What we're going to talk today is I'm going to firstly start off by talking about incorporating the data. In other words, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about how do we get the data out of the source systems with the sort of smallest footprint and lightest touch on the source system, getting that data into a Azure Blob Storage or into the cloud. How we're going to then, and we'll go through an Azure case study of a customer that's actually been using BimlFlex for the last 15 months. So we've been in private preview with BimlFlex now for the last 15 months, and I'll explain to you what BimlFlex is shortly. We'll go through that case study and really explain to you all the different things we had to think about when building this BimlFlex, specifically for the Azure framework. And then I'm going to go into a BimlFlex demo. I'm going to actually open up BimlFlex and show you guys how easy it is to actually implement a cloud solution that you can both implement for on-premise and cloud. So let's talk about getting the data out of the source system first. Before I start that, I just want to use this slide to show you the different Verigens product solutions that we offer. So if you're familiar with Biml and familiar with Verigens, you'll know that there has always been, I suppose, two tools, one called Biml Express, formerly known as Bits Helper, and then one called Biml Studio, formerly known as Mist. And what we're going to be looking at today is BimlFlex. So I'll have a look at, explain to you how the different tools compare to each other. So the first one there is, let's look at Biml Express. Now, if we look at a project cost breakdown, there is no software cost, it's free, right? But you are going to have to develop everything from scratch. You're going to use a free tool. And when it comes into business benefits, and this is if you were not using Biml and using traditional, just normal SSIS or normal data warehousing processes, you're already going to gain, you're going to accelerate the delivery, and you're going to get increased efficiency and effectiveness there. It's just a fact of using Biml, you will get that. Then we move on to Biml Studio. And because we now have better tools, you can actually then, the cost of the software, there is a software cost there. And what we'll do now is, because you're using better tools, you'll still have to build your data warehouse framework, but you can do that faster and your maintenance is reduced purely because you're using better tooling. And then again, the benefits, you are going to have a better, even a more accelerated delivery than you would have with Biml Express. And you would increase efficiency even more because you're spending less time. The tool doesn't slow you down. The free tools have some limitation. Now, when we get into BimlFlex, now this is where most of you haven't seen it. You'll probably see it for the first time today. But what BimlFlex is think about using Biml Studio and all the best bits of Biml Studio and building a data warehouse framework that creators of Biml, Verigens, have put their heads together and actually built a framework for you. So your software costs, it costs more money than Biml Studio, and we'll have all of our pricing will be on our website over the weekend. We have this policy where there's no hidden cost. You see what you're going to pay up front, and then you have hardly any development and maintenance costs. Our customers that's currently using this, they extend the framework out, and it's in the region of 2 to 3% of the effort that goes into the whole project is around sort of just tweaking a couple of things and extending the framework out. You have a massive accelerated delivery and your efficiency, because what's happening is you're freeing more of your team up to actually work on other parts of the project. Okay, and I'll go through it, and as we go through this project, you'll see how it's quite relevant. This is the BimlFlex development workflow. As with all data warehouses, it always starts with a data source. And I'm going to show you today just very quickly how I point our Excel add-in and just point that to a data source, pull in all the external metadata into Excel, and then publish all of that metadata up into our metadata repository. We're also going to be looking at our Data Vault Accelerator, but we're not really actually going to look at it. We're just going to use it to auto-generate a data vault for us. In the real world where we're building data warehouses with our customers, a lot of time is spent on modeling data vault. Please do not take away from this presentation that we are trying to say that you can just build a data vault by the click of a button. Quite the opposite. Our customers that's using BimlFlex at the moment, they really spend most of their time modeling. About 80% of their time is actually spent just modeling their data vault. Sure, our Data Vault Accelerator increases efficiency in the modeling process, but it doesn't replace the need for really good models. In actual fact, it probably emphasizes the fact that your model has to be even of a better quality, because that model drives your whole solution. Let's look at the traditional data warehouse. And when I say traditional, this is I suppose the silos that we're all familiar with. We start off with the sources, and we point a tool at the sources. In this case, it will be BimlExpress or BimlFlex or SSIs. We point it at a source. From there, we want to stage the data, possibly do a persistent staging or ODS layer, and then from there, you may want to go into a data vault. You don't always want to go into data vault, but more often than not, we recommend doing the data vault practice. And then we would also want to do business data vault to enable our analytics side of things. You could also go from staging. You can also go straight into dimensional data warehouse. And BimlFlex supports this entire traditional workflow. In other words, we can go from 1 to 2, skip 3, go to 6 from 2, or we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Or any combination of those things. So BimlFlex, you really switch on the bits that you want and you need, and it's all configurable. This is traditional data warehousing as we all know it. Now, obviously, Microsoft is now introducing, or has introduced for a long time, something which they are branding their modern data warehouse. And what we're going to focus on mostly today is sort of the top left section, the cloud and the relational section there. But before we get there, I'm not going to go into beyond relational because that's kind of like the big data side of things. And data warehousing and big data, I think it's complementary, but they are not the same thing. They're not interchangeable. I think if you are working in a big data world, the need for really good data warehouse is probably even greater. But let's look at the left-hand side of things over here. So firstly, we can use the same things that I'm going to show you today. Everything that I show you today, you can actually run on-premise or you can run in the cloud, because the layer that we have put in place there is we've got traditional packages that creates the traditional SSIS packages to move data from A to B. That stuff has been running for a couple of years now. Recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking about probably the last 2 years, we've developed our ELT patterns within Verigens with our customers. And what we use as a layer of loading the data, it's really been written to run on top of Polybase. I'm not going to go into Polybase into detail here. It's a subject matter on itself, but just to know that with using Polybase, you have some limitations that Polybase puts on you, and you have to accommodate that. So Polybase, using that, it's almost like a bulk copy process here, and we'll look at that in a little bit here. But what we're going to show you is that if you're using SQL Server 2016, we can use the same process of getting the data out into files and popping that into a cloud, into Azure as a blob storage, or you can even put that into Hadoop. We also on the left hand side kind of give you a guideline, and this is stuff that I kind of just got from the web, and this is the rule of thumb here that if you want to build a data warehouse and your data warehouse is going to be, I suppose, under 150 terabytes, which most of them are, to be honest, you're really going to look at using SQL Server rather than Azure SQL Data Warehouse or the data or analytics platform services, APS. And the reason for that is when using Azure SQL Data Warehouse, it's the same but quite different to SQL Server. So if you use the SQL Server, there's a lot of things that you have to actually take in consideration when building Azure SQL Data Warehouse. We've taken most of those in consideration for you, and we'll go through those in a little bit here. The little bit of stuff that came in there is just really, and I firmly believe this, right, is that there's quite a lot of confusion sometimes in the market and about big data and what it is. And that's why I actually like this slide, because the right-hand side, in my opinion, is where your big data is. The left-hand side is where you want to do your data warehousing stuff, which is really the space that we're working in today. So, as I discussed, there's really only 2 ways that I see. There's many more ways, but there's 2 ways that we're going to focus on. And the first one is you can take data from a source system, either files or a database, and you can use some form of transfer like Azure Data Factory or SSIS, and you can pull that data from the source system and you can pull it from a database into a database. Now, that is great and that's fine, but what tends to happen there is that the data doesn't get compressed in transfer. The data goes uncompressed and it gets loaded from A to B. However, if you go from a source to a file, which is what we're going to do, there are certain things that you have to be aware of, and you need to prepare the data correctly for the files so that the files can be loaded on the other side. But you can compress the data at source, which gives you greater transfer speeds. And in actual fact, the difference between A, or option 1, and option 2 is in a transfer speed is as close to 10 times faster to transfer a compressed file with a file copy than to try and transfer data from A to B directly, even using Azure Data Factory. And then we've got lots of tests that we've tested things out to get to this sort of optimal solution that we believe is the optimal solution. Let me take you through an Azure case study here. So one of our customers here in Australia is called Empower BI, and I'm going to take you through their sort of use case scenario, and hopefully some of it resonates with you. Most of you are from Europe, so you are used to fast internet speeds. Over here in Australia, not so much. You know, it's a big country, and we kind of scattered everywhere else. But Empower is a company that they have 2 point of sale systems that they sell. They sell it to venues and, you know, all across Australia. And these venues could be on fast internet or slower internet. They do not control the network speed. They do not control whether that network is up or down. And they do, although they supply the software, they do not control the infrastructure that this is running on. So when working with them, we really needed to come up with a solution here where, you know, we can look at the source and say, well, we need to touch that source with as lightweight as possible and make sure that that system is. Now, the current solution that we've implemented from them already, and they've been just using BimlFlex now for about 15 months, and they are a team of about 2 developers. And initially, in the beginning, they had assistance from the Verigens consulting team. And already what they have is they have a data vault, which has incorporated and integrated 10 source systems. They've got 132 hubs. You know, they've got almost 350 satellites at the moment. And for them to roll out a new venue using our tool set and the code, it takes them about a day to actually roll out a data warehouse to a new, or the extracts to a new system there. Around about a day is probably a good field. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. That's their sort of, I suppose, the overview of what they've done. Now, what we had to do with this is we have to build a system that could, again, look at multiple source systems. So it could be, they actually have MySQL, they got SQL Server, they got flat files coming in from stuff, and there's another one, Postgres. That's right. So they have all of those different systems there. So we obviously have to have a flexible source extract utility there. The next thing we need to do is that we couldn't do any source installations. And what I mean by that is some of these sites are running SQL Server Express, they're running MySQL, or they just have flat files. So what we needed to do is have the ability that if they have SQL Server running, we could use the full rich feature sets of SSIS and SQL Server to get the data out. When they didn't have SQL Server installed, what we needed to do is have an alternative approach. So what we did there is we actually created templates specifically for that scenario that uses SSIS Express. Now, if you're a SQL Server or SSIS Express developer, don't go and try and build SSIS Express packages. It's extremely frustrating because it can't do anything other than read data and write data with an execute SQL task in the middle, right? So we had to go and specifically write templates that can get that data out using a no installation cost. And then we had to work out an automated orchestration because obviously we wanted to make sure that that system can push the data rather than us having to pull it. When you work with files, you have to do a couple of different things, especially if you want to get it ready for Polybase. The first one you need to do is you need to prepare the data. Polybase is very temperamental and doesn't play too well with some of the file formats, some of the date formats that SSIS throws out. So you have to prepare dates, you have to prepare varchar columns. In other words, if you have I suppose a comment field that has line breaks in it, you have to remove the line breaks and replace it with different characters. And once you're done with that, you have to convert all of that into a UTF-8 file format and then zip it up and compress it. And once you've done that, the file that you've just extracted is 10 times smaller than if you were to have that data, or roughly, obviously files compress at different rates, but on average we have about a 10x compression rate over there. And then we simply just copy those files up to Azure Blob Storage, and I'll shortly show you how we do that. The next thing, we get into the other side. Now we're getting into the sort of database side of things. So the files are now, either if you're using on-premise, the files are now sitting in some form of file structure, sitting in Azure Blob Storage at the moment. We're going to use Polybase to read the data out of the file into a raw data vault and process everything into the raw data vault using ELT or stored procedures that has been customized and specifically written for Azure SQL Data Warehouse. We also have the ability to create point-in-time tables or bridge tables, and we have the SQL templates that does that. And I'll show you very quickly. I think we're going to run out of time, but I'll show you how easy it is to create a point-in-time table in BimlFlex. And then from there, you really have the option. With Empower, what they've done is they've literally just virtualized their data mart. In other words, we've put some views over the top of it, and they then load that into a ClickView application. But as you know, with Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you can move that into Power BI, or you can even take that into the new analysis services that's in the cloud. But that's really as simple as it is. I'd love to make it more complex, but that is the different components. So I'm going to head over and do the BimlFlex demo now. As I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our Excel add-in to actually just connect to the database. Now, what our Excel add-in actually is, when you install BimlFlex with the Excel add-in actually runs all of the Biml code behind the scenes. And that's what giving us all of that rich functionality to be able to import the data from any source here. So I'm just going to head over to objects here, and I'm literally just going to go to this tab here called Import Metadata and point it to AdventureWorks LT. Now I've shrunk this down quite a bit just to make the demo quite quickly, and I'm just going to bring all of those tables in, which is a subset of the AdventureWorks LT tables. I've got all of the metadata in, and I'm going to set all entities. So I've got all the tables there, and I'll have all the columns sitting over here with a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to go through in this demo. We have more detailed demos just about, or webinars, recordings just about importing the metadata. So I've imported all the metadata, and I'm happy with that metadata. I'm going to head over to Biml Studio. So we have two portions to BimlFlex. The one is managing the metadata, which we've done through our Excel add-in, and then we have Biml Studio, which actually gets all of the code over here. So what I'm going to do is just point, so BimlFlex, the bundle over here points at a database, the Excel add-in points at the database, and they kind of sync up. So I'm just syncing it all up, and as you can see here, I've got my tables coming through, and I have my packages will pop in here in a second. I'll get my packages coming in here, and I'll have a batch and a project sitting over there. So if I were to build this out right now, it's going to build out my standard size packages. And I've done that before the demo, so I'm just going to show you what that will look like if you didn't point this at Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So I'll go over here to Visual Studio, and this is what a package would look like, a source to staging package effectively. We're going to just truncate there, and we're going to do quite a bit of loading of metadata here. As you can see, there's quite a bit of going on there, but that is the standard package if I were just to build this out for SQL Server to SQL Server, or from any source to any destination. What do I need to do? So let's just say you're currently working on a project and you don't know if you're going to go to Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and you're currently on SQL Server, but you want to have the flexibility to just make sure that you are future-proof. Well, let me show you how complicated it is to shift all of your code from one version to the next. I'll head over to the Excel add-in here, go to the connections, and all I'll simply do is I'll just go in here and say, I'm now going to use OLADB SQL-based ELT on both these connections here. And then I'm going to just say my system type, instead of SQL Server, I'm going to make this Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So now I'm repointing the fact that I'm not targeting SQL Server anymore. I'm targeting Azure SQL Data Warehouse. I'll head back over to BimlFlex or Biml Studio here. I'll hit refresh. And what you'll see happen here is you'll actually see a couple of connections coming in here, creating the files, the flat files that we will use for Polybase. So as you can see here is all my Polybase file formats. Here is all the external tables. So you'll see here, there's the ext in front of it. So Polybase, when you configure that in Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you create something called an external table, which effectively is, you can think of that as a view over the top of a file. So what you will do is you can select from this external table, which reads the data from the file into the data warehouse. So I've got everything ready here to create my external tables, my staging tables, and these packages have now been changed. So there's a different template now, and instead of going from source to destination, it now go from source to file and do a couple other things. So I'm just going to leave it right there and hit the build button. So as this is building, we will refresh these packages here. I'll close this, and this project will refresh as soon as the build is done. Okay, let's have a look at Visual Studio here. I'll say yes, reload all. And now let's have a look at this address package here. And all it does here is it extracts the data. As I said, it extracts the data, it prepares some of the formatting, and it will then load it into a file. I'll open that up for you just so you can see. And one of the things I want to show you here is, and hopefully you guys can see this. I know this isn't always the best way to zoom it in, but here are some of that data preparation where I'm replacing all of that stuff here. But what you'll see here is I've got a modified date. And remember I discussed with you the process of, well, we need to prepare dates also. Well, it's actually quite easy with BimlFlex. So we have this additional functionality in here called data type mappings. And what we do with data type mappings is we can actually create a matrix that says that if I have a source data type of this type, so I could actually go and convert a unsigned integer, I can go and convert that to a int32. So I have this matrix of saying, well, take a source metadata type and standardize it and convert it into a target metadata type. And what that means is that I have things where I can say, well, if it's a date from SQL Server, convert it in this way. If it's from MySQL, convert it in this way. And if it's Oracle, convert it in this way. And you can add to this. So we've got a standard list there, but you can add to this. All I now need to do is I need to go and say, apply data type mappings. I say, yep, I want to apply it to this source. And I'll head back over here and just go and grab that and show you in the columns now. So what will happen in my columns here is I will have these data type mapping. Oops, not so far. I'll have these data type mappings, which now creates standard data types instead of many different data types. So you'll see that I'm standardizing my strings to certain lengths. And if you're not using Polybase, you can actually, or not using Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you have two options with the data type mappings. You can actually say, take the data type mappings and apply it into my staging layer. In other words, in your staging layer, you standardize your data types, or you can skip that and say, actually only standardize my data types into my data vault, giving you less different data types to handle, which is great because, as you say, and all the things change. But here are the SQL expressions that will, coming from the data type mappings, that will now be applied to my packages. So to expedite all of this, I'm just going to go and refresh this and build that out again. And then I'm not going to go into the package and show you the changes, but I'll then actually just execute the package. So while that's refreshing, I'll take you through, let me hit the build button there. And the rest of the control flow is fairly simple. After I've extracted the file, convert it to UTF and put it into a flat file, I'm going to zip it up. I'm going to use AZ copy to copy it up to Azure Blob Storage. And then I'm going to just remove the file because I've now loaded it up to Azure Blob Storage. That's effectively all it is. And I'll just hit reload over here. And now all I'm going to do is just actually execute it. Now, as I said, this is pointing to a very small database at the moment. And I'll execute the package here. So this is going to execute the batch and all the files. And over here, I have my Azure Blob Storage sitting over here. And if I refresh here, you'll see the files starting to come into the Azure Blob Storage at the moment there. They're just being uploaded up to Azure Blob Storage in the cloud. Now, one of the reasons I'm actually doing this in stages is what we found with our customers, especially with Empower, is that they wanted to, from day one, they wanted to connect to a source system and do some source analysis and decide what tables they want. And with the least amount of metadata changes, they actually wanted to say, well, let's start getting the data out of that system. Let's start staging the data. And what we were able to do is say, well, absolutely, let's run the source system, because at this stage, this entire process is completely disconnected from whether you are modeling your data vault or not. What you're doing effectively over here is you're creating a staging and a persistent staging environment. So you can, if you are extracting incremental loads and incremental files, this will just start going into Azure Blob Storage. So you can build a data vault from this at any given point in time. You can say, oh, I now want to model this hub and this satellite. So you can, in an agile way, can start adding to your data vault without having to worry that you are missing data. You're not extracting data that you'll need going forward. So what we're going to do now is we're going to build a data vault. And as I said, at this stage, I'm not going to do a whole data vault discussion here. I'm literally going to say my sales metadata that I just imported was perfect, and it had everything linked to each other, and all the references were perfect and corrected, and basically just using the foreign keys to define the relationships. And what we're now going to do is we're going to run our data vault accelerator here. So we've got this button at the top here, which takes the source metadata, the modeled source metadata, and will now give you a preview of what a data vault looks like. And again, as I said, One of the things that sometimes gets lost in translation or when we discuss Data Vault accelerators is that everything that we do here as an accelerated process, you can do manually. If you want to go into the metadata spreadsheet and actually define your hubs separately, your links, your satellites, or because it's Excel, you can bring it in any way you want. What I have here is I now have my hubs, my links, my satellites, my LSATs for effectivity. I've got all of those defined here. I can even go into the documentation here and run a quick schema diagram just to preview my data vault and have a bit of a play and have a look and see has it created my data vault the way I envisioned it. Is it visualizing the data vault correctly? So what I can do here is I can go and say, well, just show me my data vault preview. I can look at my data vault and go, oh, okay, yep, that's what it is. That's exactly how I envisioned it. I can just look at my backbone. And we're adding more visualizations, which just shows my hubs and my links. And I can now look for unit of measures and go and say, well, actually, hold on, those things there need to be unit of measure. Move things around, go and remodel and put it in again. But let's just say I'm happy with my data vault here. I hit over to BimlFlex. I publish data vault import, which effectively takes the preview of my data vault and pushes that up to the metadata database. It will then pull that metadata back down because I've now published that data vault and build out everything that I need to build my data vault. So now all of my code that I need to load my raw data vault will actually exist within Biml Studio here. And because we are using ELT and not SSIS packages, I don't really have to build this. All I now need to do is say, give me my SQL scripts and just be aware is everything that I show you here manually can be automated. So you can actually have an automated process that will do all of this for you. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first go and say, I want to create my external tables. Now in creating external tables or Polybase, you need to do a couple of different things. You have to have the create table statement, but you also have to tell it what the file format is. And to do that, we actually just need to go into what we call extension points. And here, this is really where we've, from a versions point of view, had look at our framework and saying, you know what, we can't possibly build everything that will do everything for our customers. But what we need to do is we need to put these placeholders in place, or these little points of extensions where they can go in and define either something that is bespoke to their environment or custom for their environment. So all you need to do here is just really fill in the gap. So, and I'll show you in the file that I'm creating, I've already got an extension point in the project. So if I go into generate scripts here, and I'll just say create external table script, this is going to come back with a table script for me that's going to build my external tables. I've already moved that across to my Visual Management Studio here. This is the same script, and here is that extension point. It's even helpful enough to tell you that at this point, that's where you can actually extend our code out, and that's throughout our ELT's code. You'll see these little placeholders that says, oh, at this point, you could actually inject your own custom SQL logic. So you can do that as it shows you can either do that at an object level, or you can do that at a batch or a project level. So you can actually inject code that says, oh, for all of the tables, all of the SQL associated with this set of objects, I want to go and put something in there. Okay, that's the way you can extend it out. So I'm just going to run this in, which will create all of my external tables. And if I now go to the external tables here, I just go and select top 1000 from address. Now, hopefully that SSIS package loaded all of this data correctly, that I have data in here. And yep, there we go. So effectively, external table, as I said, it's just a view over the top of the flat file. And personally, I think it's awesome. It's really opened up so many possibilities in the data warehousing space, and especially optimizing the ELT side of things. And you know, we're building all of this with Biml and templates, right? So there's also this sort of consensus there that Biml can only do SSIS. Well, we've just built a whole ELT framework here using Biml and using templates. So we've loaded all of the external tables. So now we actually need to go and build some of the, I suppose, the SQL tables. And again, we just head back into Biml Studio here, and we say create my Azure Data Warehouse table script. You'll see that there's a difference here between an Azure SQL Server Data Warehouse table script and a create table script. And the reason is because the file formats are so different, a lot different. But with Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you have to actually define the hash distribution. And I'll just go in here and show you. Yep, this one. So effectively with every table, you need to tell it how to distribute the data. So with Azure SQL Data Warehouse, because it's a parallel processing, what happens is that data gets distributed to all of these different nodes. And what you need to do is you need to tell it how do you want that to distribute it. Now, when we worked with Empower, they had a lot of because the point of sale system, you have a lot of sales order headers and sales order lines or sales order detail in the same way as AdventureWorks LT has. And what we found is that if we distribute the data, let's just say we would distribute this data, and I'll just see if I've got it down the bottom here. I probably have it down the bottom down here somewhere. No, I'm not going to go try and find it. If you were to distribute the data based on primary key or based on sort of the business key, because the sales order headers business key doesn't include the sales order lines business key, they are different. It will actually distribute the data in different places. Meaning that if you were to build a denormalized fact table, what will happen here is data that is related to each other that you want to join together actually sits on different nodes, and it needs to move the data across a lot. So what we did is we introduced this concept of a hash distribution key. Now, as I said, there's a lot more to this, but I'll just give you a bit of a flavor here. So if I were to look at, let's just say, sales order detail here, it's got the sales order ID. And if I've got the sales order header here, it's got the sales order ID. So what I want to say is those two tables, I want them to be distributed using that same keys. So what we can do is we can add another row in both of these. I'm not going to add all the details, but I'll just show you what you can do. You add the row over here, which becomes a derived row. And then as a change type, instead of key or type 1, we define this as a hash distribution key. Now, personally, if you are building a data warehouse for a SQL data warehouse, you absolutely have to have that functionality. Whether you're building this yourself or whether you're using BimlFlex, you have to distribute your data correctly so that your queries are the same. Now, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, the query performance on that system is just fantastic. You know, it's nothing wasted. However, if you don't do this, you'll have a query running for 2, maybe 3 minutes. If you put it on that same hash distribution, that query comes down to less than a second. It really makes that big a difference on your query performance when you're actually starting to read the data for your analytics side. The next thing we're going to do here is, now that we've got the tables created, oh, sorry, did I run that? I can't remember. No, I didn't run that. Let me run this real quick. I'll execute this. And one of the things that you'll also find when you work with Azure SQL Data Warehouse, because it's using this distributed node structure, code that runs super fast on SQL Server, like a drop and a create table that takes a second, those kinds of queries, like a truncate table and this sort of drop and create table, they take 20, 30 seconds, right? It's still not the end of the world, but there are certain differences in the two systems. So now I've got all my tables created here. There they all are. What I now need to do is I need to create the ETL to load that data vault. Again, I'll just head over to Biml Studio here, and I'll just go and say data vault procedure script by source. And we've worked on these, there's two different ones, the data vault procedure script and by source. But what we're doing here is we're saying for a specific table that's coming from a source, we want to build the hub, the satellite, the link, the LSATs, everything associated with that source table gets built in one stored procedure. And everything can run in parallel because the links will infer hubs if they need to. One thing also that took us quite a while to get right is that SQL in Azure SQL Data Warehouse is the same but different. There's a lot of things that just isn't compatible, like a merge statement, an update statement. So what you have to do is you have to write a lot of, go and delete this stuff, go and insert it. So you almost have to, it's faster to write a delete and an insert than to write an update statement. So this code has been optimized for Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Again, if you were to build SQL Server 2016, the code is optimized for SQL Server 2016. Right, so this is all the stored procedures that I've just created. And there they are. As you can see, they run per source system. And there's quite a lot of code there, which I'm not going to go through right now. But effectively, now you have your code loaded. I'll just execute a couple of them, just so you can see. And this is going to take a couple of seconds to run. So that's going to just load from Polybase, load my data warehouse or my data vault. And depending on how I've scaled this data warehouse all the way down to 100 data warehouse units. These things over here, it's kind of it's actually quite strange. The more data it has to process, the faster it runs per row, so to speak. So it really likes big data sets rather than tiny data sets. The address should probably be done by now, so let's have a look there. Okay, there's my address data, there's my satellite there, and everything will be loaded there, right? Okay, so now I've loaded my data vault. I've got all my code written for my data vault. This code is obviously, you can extend it to a certain degree. Obviously the code has been optimized for loading the data vault pattern. Now we want to obviously work on, and I'm just going to do one of these. We want to load a point in time table. This we've worked with, and I'll just point this out. I personally worked with Roland Vos on this, and because we have a similar, I suppose, philosophy when it comes to point in time and bridge tables. And what we've done is we've worked on what he would call the sort of implementing the point in time table, the sliding point in time table, not the snapshot point in time table. So we've implemented what we call a sliding point in time table. In other words, it just keeps adding to it, and you can throw the front bits away. So at any point in time, it tells you what is the satellites associated with it. But please feel free to read this up. Roland has actually put together quite a lot of training material for Veregins in the context of BimlFlex, which we'll also be publishing over the next couple of weeks and months. Let's have a look at what we've done and how we've actually implemented point in time tables. So if you're a data vault expert out there, you'll know that a point in time table is between a hub and as many satellites that is linked to that hub. What we have done is we've said that you can go in here and just say, you know what, I'm going to pick a hub. So I'm just going to say I'm going to pick this hub over here, and I'm going to go and create a point in time table. And I'm just going to say I want to create a point in time table here, and I'm going to call this point in time underscore, sorry, no, that's not right, address. Okay. Now, if you had multiple satellites connecting to this hub, you could specify as many or as little of them as you want. You can have 2 satellites or no satellites. If you have no satellites specified, it'll actually create a point in time table for that hub and any satellite that is attached to that hub. We'll set that, and that's all you need to do. What now happens in Biml Studio, if I refresh this will just take a second. If I'm going to refresh this right now, what you'll see is you'll see a table dropping in here called point in time table, and with that it'll have the hub that it's linked to and any satellites. In this case there'll only be one satellite, but it'll give you the satellite surrogate key and the satellite's effective date or start date that it needs to do the inner joins when you build dimensions out. Okay, so here it is. You'll see there that it's only one. If there was multiple satellites, we'll have more of this, and this will give you your effective time slice for this point in time table. Again, if you're interested in this, we can spend a lot more time with you on this stuff here. And then the next thing we want to do is we've got this business data vault scripts. So we create point in time tables and bridge tables. But if I now just hit this create data vault business vault procedure script, it'll give me my point in time tables procedure code, which again I have over here. And I'm not going to run this. I have it here somewhere. Yeah, I'm not going to run this, but as you can see, that's just one point in time table, and you can see there's quite a lot of logic that we've wrapped up there. The next thing we want to do is we'll run the point in time tables, and then we actually provide our customers with templates that they can customize to build the virtual data marts. Now, when we actually looked at building the virtual data marts out, we kind of stopped ourselves, because when it comes to the data mart, there is so much business logic that actually have to be put into the data mart, and combinations and joins that has to be done, that even if you give a template, you may actually do more harm than good there. But what we do is we actually give our customers a sort of cookie cutter approach to say, listen, to join a point in time table to a satellite, this is how you join it, and to join a bridge to a point in time table, this is how you do it. So we give you these sort of nuggets of code that you can use and bring it together to build out your data vault, your virtual data mart. And that's it really from a demo point of view of what the tool does. So once again, I'd just like to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you giving up your time to look at this webinar with us. We really want you to let us know what you think of anything related to Biml, really. So if you go onto Twitter, just go #Biml, or on our LinkedIn page, please start asking us questions. If you want to contact me directly, you can either go email sales@veregins.com. The email will come to me eventually, or you can follow me on Twitter @PeterAvenant. We also have @BimlScript, which is a little bit more of it. So once again, thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in the next webinar.